His boots were perfect, but his heart chose something more human. Welcome to the channel where every story carries weight, honor, and a powerful message. If you're someone who believes that even silence can speak volumes, you're in the right place. Before we begin, drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories travel. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the bell icon, because tomorrow's episode will take you even deeper into a moment of duty, sacrifice, and unexpected humanity. Now take a breath, lean in, and get ready for a story that might just change the way you see discipline and compassion. The morning sun glowed softly across the cobbled courtyard in front of Buckingham Palace. The air carried a sense of occasion, quiet anticipation wrapped in cool spring wind. Visitors from every corner of the globe leaned against the black and gold barriers, cameras in hand, hearts expectant. It was almost 11 a.m., time for the changing of the guard. A brass band waited at attention. Behind them, in perfect formation, stood the Queen's Guard, clad in red tunics, black trousers, and the iconic bearskin hats that made them look 10 feet tall. Their movements were precise, rehearsed, almost mechanical. To the average tourist, it was a charming bit of royal tradition. But to the guards, it was sacred, a living ritual of pride and discipline, polished down to the last button. Among the guards stood Ethan Carter, a 29-year-old soldier from Colorado. A former U.S. Marine, Ethan had transferred into NATO ceremonial duty through a rare joint program. Though American by birth, he had sworn to uphold the same standard as any soldier of the British Crown, and over the past 3 years, he had earned quiet respect among his unit. Never late, never sloppy, never off rhythm. His boots struck pavement like a metronome. His posture was sculpted from stone, and his stare unflinching. To Ethan, this wasn't theater. This was service. Not just to monarchy or country, but to the very idea of order in a chaotic world. That morning, something felt off. The crowd was louder than usual. A group of teenagers near the gates laughed louder than most. A toddler wailed in a stroller. A man in a baseball cap kept yelling out random questions, hoping to get a rise out of the guards. Ethan didn't blink. He never did. Then, as the ceremonial march began and the heavy boots began their synchronized thunder, it happened. From somewhere behind the barriers, a small corgi, untethered and panicked, slipped into the open space, between the crowd and the advancing line of guards. It darted through the legs of startled tourists and ran headfirst onto the parade path. There were gasps. A mother pulled her child close. Someone shouted, "Hey, get the dog!" Ethan's eyes locked onto the small figure bounding toward him. In training, they had drilled it in 100 different ways. Never break formation, never break posture, never react unless ordered, march through anything. That was the rule. But this wasn't just anything. This was a living, breathing creature. It was scared, lost, and it was headed directly into Ethan's path. Time slowed. He calculated the weight of his boot. Nearly 2.5 pounds of pressure would come down with military force. If he stayed on course, his step would crush the dogs. Back, the entire unit was watching, even if they weren't allowed to look. The crowd was watching too. Phones were out, recording, and in the span of a heartbeat, Ethan made a choice. He shifted half an inch to the left. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't flashy. To the untrained eye, it may have looked like nothing at all, but to his fellow guards, and especially to his commander, it meant everything. His boot came down safely beside the dog, which yelped once and escaped toward the grass unharmed. The line behind him was forced to adjust by milliseconds. A ripple passed through the unit, barely visible but measurable. Ethan knew what that meant. As he marched forward, face unchanged, he felt it deep in his chest. He hadn't lost rhythm. He had lost eligibility. He was no longer perfect. But as he pressed onward, step by step across the palace yard, he said nothing. He didn't look back, because some mistakes are made on purpose. It should have been just another step, just another strike of the boot on the pavement in a rhythm that had become second nature. But as Ethan Carter's right foot rose mid-march, his eyes locked on the corgi now frozen in the middle of the ceremonial route. The little dog wasn't charging anymore. It had stopped, overwhelmed by noise and movement. Its small chest heaved up and down. Its eyes, wide and trembling, looked straight up at him. It didn't bark. It didn't run. It just stood there. Ethan didn't have time to think. He had milliseconds. Behind him, the rest of the platoon advanced, like a machine. Rows of boots moving forward in perfect formation, all trusting the man in front to keep pace, to set the line. In this moment, Ethan was the line. Any deviation on his part would echo backward, like knocking a single domino in a 1,000-piece chain. But in that split second, logic clashed with instinct. His training screamed, "Stay the course." But his humanity whispered, "Not this time." He knew the consequences. A step off rhythm might not result in a demotion, but in the world of ceremonial precision, imperfection was a quiet stain, the kind that didn't wash out with apologies. Still, his body moved before his brain could finish calculating. Ethan shifted his weight, half an inch to the left. It was barely perceptible. To the crowd, it looked like a natural flow of movement, just another soldier doing his job. But to those trained to see it, the slight delay in heel contact, the curve of the boot path, the shoulders microscopic sway, it was a breach, a tiny break in the sacred choreography. The corgi zipped past his leg and darted toward the barrier, finally spotted by a palace attendant who scooped it up to safety. The entire incident lasted less than 5 seconds. The Han brass band didn't stop. The platoon didn't falter. The ceremony moved forward as though nothing had happened. But Ethan felt the weight of that half-inch, like 1,000 pounds strapped to his back. The moment they returned to the barracks, his fellow guard, James, the man to his immediate right, gave him a look, not of anger, not of judgment, just a quiet warning. "You know they're gonna flag it, right?" Ethan nodded. Another guard, older, scoffed under his breath. "Should have kept walking. It's just a dog." But Ethan didn't reply. He didn't need to. Later that afternoon, word trickled down through the ranks. The incident had been reviewed. The commanding officer had noticed the deviation. It was being logged. No disciplinary action, no public acknowledgement, but also no nomination for the upcoming state parade, the highest ceremonial honor of the quarter. Ethan had been on the short list. Now he was off it. No one told him outright. They didn't need to. His name simply wasn't read during the assignment briefing. And that was it. No fanfare, no thank you, no scolding, just silence. The kind of silence that says we saw what you did, and we won't forget it. But as Ethan stood alone in the locker room that evening, peeling off his uniform with practiced ease, he looked down at his boots. Still shining? Still straight? Still strong? He whispered under his breath, not for anyone else to hear, "I'd do it again." Because sometimes the line between right and regulation is only half an inch wide. And sometimes the bravest thing a soldier can do is take that step anyway. The next morning, footage of the incident surfaced online, not from official sources. Just a blurry clip from a tourist's phone, posted to a travel blog with the title, "Guard Swerves to Save a Corgi." Absolute legend. Within hours, it spread like wildfire. Comments flooded in. "Did you see that? He moved just enough. What a guy. Who says soldiers don't have a heart? This is why I love the British Guard. Precision and compassion. But inside the barracks, there was no cheering, no congratulations, just silence. Ethan Carter arrived at formation exactly on time, his uniform crisp, boots polished, expression unreadable. The same man who'd stood like stone during dozens of ceremonies now stood quietly among men who no longer looked at him quite the same way. His commanding officer passed by during roll call. No acknowledgement, not even eye contact. Ethan felt the shift in energy. Not harsh, not hostile, but cold. It wasn't about the dog. It was about the breach. A man who once walked the perfect line had deviated, even for a second. That wasn't celebrated here. Later that day, during lunch in the mess hall, Ethan sat alone at the end of the long wooden table, his tray untouched. The usual clatter of trays, boots, and banter filled the room, except near him. Across the hall, James leaned into a younger guard and whispered, just loud enough for Ethan to hear, "He's trending online now, but he won't trend on the roster." The younger guard asked, "You think they'll punish him?" James shook his head. "No need to, they'll just, forget he's there." Ethan didn't flinch, didn't speak, just sat there, eyes on the knot in the wood grain beneath his tray, jaw locked. The next blow came quietly. That afternoon, a list was pinned to the bulletin board outside the armory. The final assignment list for the state parade, the highest ceremonial honor for the quarter. Only 12 names. Ethan's wasn't on it. He stared at the paper for exactly 3 seconds. Not long enough to let anyone know it mattered. Just long enough to memorize the names that had made it. He turned and walked away. That night, as he unlaced his boots in the locker room, a fellow guard, Mark, a quiet but fair-minded corporal, passed by and paused at his bench. "They're saying you flinched," Mark said softly. Ethan looked up but said nothing. "I saw the clip. You didn't flinch. You chose." Still, Ethan didn't reply. Mark placed a folded piece of paper on the bench beside him, then walked away. Ethan stared at it for a moment before opening it. Inside was a single line. "One step doesn't define a soldier. How you carry the rest of them does." He folded the paper again, tucked it into his breast pocket. No applause in here, no fanfare. But somehow, that quiet moment hit harder than any headline. Because while the crowd outside had cheered and the internet had called him a hero, inside the guard, he was just another soldier who had stepped out of line. And that, in this world, meant more than any viral video ever could. By the end of the week, Ethan Carter received an official summons, a thin envelope tucked under his bunk. No explanation, just a time, a date, and a room number. Ceremonial Conduct Review, 14-day Friday. No one spoke to him that morning. Not during breakfast, not during drills. Even James, the guard who usually never stopped talking, kept his distance. Everyone knew what the review meant. It wasn't a trial. It wasn't a punishment hearing. But it was something close. A chance for the board to decide. Was the deviation an honorable exception or a failure of discipline? The room was bare. 3 senior officers seated behind a simple table, a TV screen to the right, a printed transcript of the march on the ID desk in front of them. Ethan stood at parade rest, arms behind his back, boots square, eyes forward. The chair in the center, he noticed, had been left empty. Symbolic. It always was. That chair represented the regiment, an unseen presence watching every man. The board began. They played the footage, slowed down, frame by frame. They asked him to confirm the time, the movement, the position. He answered with clarity. Not a single stammer, not a single excuse. At 11:03:17, I deviated my left foot approximately half an inch off trajectory to avoid contact with a dog that had entered the parade path. My decision was made in under 1 second. Were you given any order to adjust formation? No, sir. Were you aware that your deviation altered the tempo of the 2 soldiers behind you? Yes, sir. They nodded, wrote notes, didn't ask why. That part didn't matter. They weren't judging his heart. They were judging the uniform. After a long pause, the lead officer looked him square in the eye. Private Carter, your decision did not cause injury, nor disrupt the ceremony beyond minor formation discrepancy. Given the circumstance, we are not pursuing disciplinary action. Ethan exhaled quietly, just once, but then came the second sentence, the one he'd expected. However, due to the breach of marching protocol, your nomination for the upcoming state parade is hereby withdrawn. No debate, no appeal. They dismissed him with a nod, not a handshake, not a thank you. He stepped out of the room into the cool hallway where his boots echoed alone. Back at the barracks, the assignment list was updated. His name was gone. That night he sat on the edge of his bunk, uniform folded beside him, staring at the same boots he had worn that day, Still clean, still tight, still in line. He could have told himself that it didn't matter. That one missed parade didn't define his career. But that wasn't true. Not for Ethan. He'd trained for this moment, sacrificed for it. And now it had vanished. Not because of failure, but because of compassion. He thought of the dog, the look in its eyes, the moment when he shifted. No regrets. That's when he reached under his cot and pulled out a plain sheet of paper. He had written a statement the night before the review. He never turned it in, but the words still mattered. In neat handwriting it said, "I acted not to defy the uniform, but to uphold the part of it that still recognizes life, even the small, scared, and silent kind." He folded the page once, then again, and then with calm hands he lit a match and watched the flame consume it. No headlines, no medals. But deep down Ethan knew he didn't step wrong, he stepped true. The following week came and went like any other march. Rest, drill, repeat. No one mentioned the review. No one brought up the missed parade. And Ethan didn't ask. The regiment had a way of moving on without discussion, like freshly swept footprints on wet concrete. There 1 minute, gone the next, but something had changed. Not in how others treated him, but in how he carried the silence. It was heavier now. Not shame, not regret. Just weight. The kind that comes from doing something right and still paying for it. Each morning he woke before dawn, tied his laces, straightened his uniform, shined his boots, and stood exactly where he was assigned, never 1 inch off center. Tourists returned in droves, cameras flashed, children waved. His face, as always, remained still, stone carved from discipline, but inside he felt the echo of every step since that day. The half-inch that cost him something no one else could see. One evening, after a long shift, Ethan returned to the locker room, still, quiet, almost sacred in its routine. He opened his locker, neat, as always. His gloves, folded, his cap, brushed. Clean, but something was different. Resting on the shelf, tucked beneath his extra pair of socks, was a small, folded slip of paper. No name, no envelope, just a single sheet, carefully creased. He glanced around. No one else was in the room. He unfolded the note. 1 sentence, handwritten, no signature. Doing the right thing doesn't need a witness. He stared at the words. For a long time. They weren't fancy, they weren't official, but they hit harder than any commendation he'd ever received. He sat on the bench, elbows on knees, the note still in hand. It wasn't the parade that had hurt the most. It was the silence afterward, the absence of anyone acknowledging the cost of a small kindness, made in the space between duty and instinct. But now, in this simple message, there was validation. Someone had seen. Someone had understood. He didn't need to know who wrote it. Maybe it was Mark, the quiet corporal who'd spoken up once before. Maybe it was a senior officer who couldn't speak publicly. Maybe it was someone entirely unexpected. It didn't matter. The next day, Ethan returned to his post. Same uniform, same posture, same boots. But something had shifted inside. That note stayed with him, folded neatly in the inner pocket of his tunic. Not for display, not for approval, but for strength. A reminder that doing the right thing isn't always clean, or celebrated, or rewarded. Sometimes it's costly, quiet, unseen, but it still matters. So when the next ceremony came and the crowd swelled and the march began, Ethan moved in perfect sync, his rhythm exact, his bearing flawless, the very image of discipline. And yet beneath the layers of brass and wool tucked close to his heart was a single line on a piece of paper, one that no one else could see. Doing the right thing doesn't need a witness. But this time, Ethan didn't feel unseen. He felt resolved. Now that you've heard the story, we want to hear from you. If you were in Ethan's position, would you have shifted your step to save that small, frightened dog, knowing it might cost you your place in something you trained years for? Do you believe compassion can exist alongside discipline? Or are there moments when emotion must be set aside in the name of protocol? Drop a comment below and share your thoughts. Whether you're a veteran, someone in uniform, or just someone who's ever had to make a difficult decision between rules and doing what felt right, you have a voice in this. Have you ever made the right choice, even when no one saw it? Or worse, when someone did see it and misunderstood? Share your story. You never know who might be reading it. Someone who's facing their own crossroads right now. And one more thing. What matters more? In your eyes, perfect duty or imperfect humanity?